What's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the 715 Brew Crew Tailgates podcast as part of the Man Cave podcast that is brought to you by Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. Dan here with you. Brandon Berg's going to be joining me here in just a quick second. Just a quick reminder to follow and subscribe to both the Man Cave podcast and the 715 Brew Crew Tailgate podcast. Let's talk some baseball, Brewers baseball, because we are less than a week away from opening day, Brandon. And I know Pat Murphy the other day mentioned, Friday, kind of a day to let some of their veterans know, like a Mark Canha, what the plan is going to be and such. And we've seen some roster moves already. Andrew Monasterio be an option to AAA. With that particular move, do you think that bodes well for a guy like Durbin to make the team? And a lot has happened already this week in terms of who's going to play short, because it began the week. It looks like it's Bryce Terang and Ortiz was going to play second, but now Terang has arm fatigue, so they announced Ortiz as a starting shortstop, and Terang's going back at second. First of all, going back to the Durbin one, do you think this bodes well for him to make this roster? And then part of me, too, I want to ask you, Brandon, is if Terang would have been the opening day shortstop, would the Brewers have been better to have Ortiz stay at third and Durbin at second at that point?
I think it kind of probably just comes down to right now who they felt more comfortable with in that fourth infielder spot. And I think if you're going strictly off of spring training production, Oliver Dunn has done everything he can to make a name for himself, and he's more of a third baseman than a second baseman. So I think that's part of it too. Vinny Capra can play second or third, and we've talked about how he's had a really good spring training. He's put himself in position to maybe be that other infielder, and Durbin can play third, even though it's kind of been maybe a bit of an adventure at time. I think it just comes down to where do you with those two, with Joey Ortiz and Bryce Terang, you're getting high level defense there. It's just a matter of where do you value it? Do you value it up the middle at short and second, or do you value it just on the left side of the infield at second? Or at shortstop and third. Mm-hmm. And I think they really value it up the middle. So, when the way things have developed with how Oliver Dunn has hit the ball, how Vinny Capra's hit the ball, and the fact that Caleb Durbin can play third, I think that's kind of how maybe they came to that decision. Mm-hmm. You knew that it was either going to be second base or third base. It was going to kind of be the all hands on deck spot to start the year. And I think just with the way things have developed, third base is just where it is. Mm-hmm.
I think part of it, though, too, and kind of what you alluded to, I think some of these had to have been made with what Vinny and Dunn have done in spring training, with especially the offensive numbers that they put
up. And I think the big domino here was Vinny Capra, because he has no options left. So if the Brewers were to decide, hey, you're going to make the opening day roster, he gets exposed to waivers. Mm-hmm. And given how he played this spring, there might be a team out there that takes a shot at him.
Yep.
This is one that I don't, every year there's always one or two guys that maybe you don't see coming. Mm-hmm. And I would say Vinny Capra definitely qualifies. And, that's, it just forces decisions. But that's your job when you're in that spot is, look, we got to make, if you're that player that's, maybe you come into the spring on the outside looking in, but knowing there's still a chance, it's on you to kind of make the organization have to make some difficult decisions. And that's what Vinny Capra's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pitching-wise now, we know Tobias Myers is going to be missing at least the first couple turns of the rotation. It sounds like Quintana, just because of the ramp-up, missing at least the first turn through the rotation here, which now, we know the first three, which is the series and the Yankees, but it's TBD who gets the home opener. Logan Henderson's name's been thrown out there. Alexander potentially stretched out as well. How do you see, or what do you think the Brewers are going to kind of combat this with the back end of their rotation, knowing it's not going to be Brandon Woodruff, even though he's trending well right now?
Right. And I think early on in the year you have the ability to kind of, to use the old phrase, the whole Johnny Holstaff, where you can, that, like, okay, this is something we may just have to do for a week or two. The guys you mentioned, Logan Henderson was the one I was really interested in. And, he made the start Monday, and it didn't go great. But he's a younger guy that, the organization really likes as a starter, and, that someone that even if he's not with the big league team now, like, he could make a fair amount of starts this year. Mm-hmm. Tyler Alexander he's a veteran. He's done it for a while. He's bounced around the league. So he's someone that even if the results aren't haven't been superb in spring training. I think he's one that they would still feel okay with, just because they know, like, okay, there's a certain baseline. Okay, this guy's done it in the big leagues before. Like, we know we can, if we give him 3 starts or something in April, that he's going to know how to navigate it. And I mean, you look at it elsewhere. A guy like Chad Patrick, who was added to the 40-man roster, had a good year last year at AAA for the team. He was another part of, I believe, the William Contreras deal that you didn't really hear much about, but he's someone that's on the 40-man roster that they could pull from to see. But right now I'm not really sure, because you mentioned you have a couple spots you kind of have to account for. Jose Quintan's going to be there sooner than later, but just with him signing a little bit later on, it just sounds like he's maybe not quite ready for it right now.
Right. Any other? I mean, we just got a handful of games, a few games left with spring training here. Do you think there's any other questions surrounding this? I mentioned Mark Canha a little bit earlier. Would that be a guy you'd like to see the Brewers keep? I know maybe mostly DH, first base, maybe get you a little bit in the outfield. I don't know how much he would actually play out there. And speaking of outfield, do you think they carry 4, or are they going to have 5 this year?
That's a good question. And obviously in the outfield, I think the big domino is Manuel Margot. And Jake Bauers is in there too, because he's played some outfield, and he's played in the past, but I mean, he's more of a first baseman than outfielder. But I think for that final outfielder, you're kind of looking for someone that's like, you can do it, but ideally you're not looking for them to do it a lot. And I think both Bauers and Canha kind of fall into that category, where they can play outfield, but it's kind of like me playing shortstop and slow pitch softball back in the day. Like, I can do it, but that doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily great. And ideally you'd like to have other people to do it, but if you're in a pinch, you can do it.
Right.
But Manuel Margot, I mean, that's he's more of a corner outfielder now. I mean, earlier in his career he was a high level center fielder, but given what the Brewers have and the depth they have in the outfield, you can play him in a corner and feel pretty decent about it. But that's going to be the question, because, Mark Canha, he hasn't had a great spring training as far as the bat goes. But I think he's one of those guys that, even if that's the way it's been, you still feel pretty good that, like, when the lights are on, when the lights are bright and the regular season starts, you feel like, okay, this is a guy that's still going to give you good at bats, even if spring training it hasn't gone great. So, I feel pretty good about Canha making the club. Another name I would say would potentially be in that mix for a corner outfield spot is Tyler Black, because he's played outfield, and there's some people that think, like, ultimately that's where he plays, but he just really hasn't played there in spring training for the Brewers. Like, I could see him going down to AAA and maybe them playing him first base and then the corner outfield in AAA. You don't want it for a guy that you think can do it, but you haven't had him do it a lot. You don't want to have him kind of just do it in the majors. Like, you want to see it done in the minors first. So, right now, I mean, I don't know if Margot makes the team or not. I mean, you mentioned today's kind of the day where, they're going to let those veterans know, hey, this is probably the direction we're going. Be transparent with them and say, hey, would you start the year at AAA, like, knowing, like, hey, if something happens, like, you'd be our first option if something happens. But there's a couple different ways they could go with it.
Yeah, I'm kind of, and we've seen before in the past too, like with some of these guys, that they'll hold on to an extra position player if they've performed well in spring training, right? I mean, Eric Haas last year is the example. Was Jesus Aguilar the year they had like G-Man Choi, Eric Thames, and Jesus Aguilar? Was that the year? Then they traded G-Man Choi.
Yeah, I don't
after.
Remember offhand. That could be, because I do remember that they did have, like, because G-Man Choi made the opening day roster, but then he only lasted like a few days.
Yeah,
and then they sent him down. Then ultimately he got dealt. So that could have been that year, because I also think that wasn't that also the year, because I remember them starting the year in San Diego, and wasn't that also the year the Browns actually playing first base?
Might have been,
for like a little bit, and then obviously ultimately once you had Thames and you had Aguilar, you didn't really need Braun to play first base.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, you never know how things are going to work out. And how things are going to stack up at certain spots.
Right. So, I wouldn't, and I think the thing is too, I know we talk a lot about it, what's this opening day roster look like, and they're going to reveal it, and they make a big deal about it too. It could change after one day.
It does, and it often does. Like, and that's the thing. Like, it's a big deal for the players to be on the opening day roster. I remember last year when the Brewers had the videos of, like, the younger guys when they made it, and it's a big deal to make it. But you're right. Like, it's one day, at the end of March for a season that goes into October. Like it's almost feels like it's more of a ceremonial thing.
Yeah.
Like you want to be there because obviously that shows that the team has confidence in you. But we've seen players over the years that they don't make the opening day roster, but you kind of forget. They get called up in April sometime, and by like June or July, you forget that. You just think, oh, this person's a consistent contributor for us. You forget that, oh, well, they didn't necessarily start the year on the big league lineup.
Right. Yeah. Do you think because once in a while we'll have like a surprise guy that makes that, like a couple years ago, it was a little surprise that Bryce Terang made it, right? On the opening day roster. Is that guy Durbin this year? Is it maybe somebody else?
Could be.
Or?
I mean, I still think you in spots like that, you look out of the bullpen. If there's someone that, maybe we're a little surprised at, and we're going to see how those chips fall. And as much as we know the Brewers like to, maneuver around their bullpen, two guys that make it are with the team in New York might not be with the team by the time they get to Kansas, or they face Kansas City. That's just kind of the way it is. They like to have flexibility there. So, offhand, I can't really think of anybody, but you don't know.
How does the Nick Mears and he's sick, but he's going to start the beginning of the season on the IL too. That doesn't sound like it's a long-term thing, right?
No,
That's
just that
kind
he's
of a
not going to
build-up?
be. Yeah, just that he's not going to be ready for opening day. I forget the illness he had, but he dropped a bunch of weight. Like, and you need a little time. I mean, I think any of us over the years, if you've had like a really bad flu or whatever, where you drop some weight and it sticks with you for a while. So obviously they're just erring on the side of caution.
Yeah. Trying to think. Yeah, I mean it's going to be because we're starting to see. The Andrew Monasterio one kind of makes sense. I know he's been with the team the last couple of years, Major League, but when you got a guy with options, because that factors into some of these decisions, right?
Does.
You got to play those cards a little bit.
Right, because he had a pretty good spring training hitting the ball, so it's I don't think he necessarily did anything wrong. It's kind of a numbers game at that point. You're right. Like when you have options, like sometimes it works against you a little bit, where the team just knows, hey, we can do this now, and then doesn't mean it's forever, but it's just kind of the way it is for now.
Right.